Now, I was asked to address a question, the future of cities. I take that seriously. And it means, in many ways, that I've got to remove myself a bit from where we are at now. We know from history that many projections into the future that start with what are, let's say, the dynamic conditions of a time, of a period, got it wrong. We know from history that there are extraordinary ruptures in dynamics and whole new arrangements emerge. We know from history that the powerless can actually get to make a history. They do it with different temporalities, they do it with different instruments, but they get to make a history. Now, the city, and this is the dominant image that I want to sort of, doesn't even say city, that I would like to sort of put in this room right now. And that is, what are the structures, what are the spaces, what are the processes that are so particular and complex at the same time and incomplete, they're not finished, that they allow us to see something that is more than the thing itself. So for instance, when I am trying to do my research on cities, I have to stand back enough from the city that I have to rediscover what is a city. So I say the city is a complex but incomplete system. And in that mixture of complexity and incompleteness lies its capacity to keep reinventing itself. It changes. A good, complex city has outlasted over centuries, millennia sometime, far more powerful but closed systems. So when I think about the future of the city, it's not that it is a guess. It is more that I am interested in understanding what are the non-urban processes that are going to be shaping what our cities mean. So that is a bit what I want to sort of, think aloud with you. I am not somebody who would call herself in the business of predicting. I don't do that because I like very long durations, and I'm always amazed at how wrong the predictions of one time got it about whatever the immediate future. Now, I must say that just a minute here on my methodological practice, which is really a bit sui generis, and one way of putting it, one way of articulating it, is that I need a space before method. Now, maybe for an architect that doesn't matter, but for a social scientist, you are meant to throw yourself immediately into method. I can't do that. And so that zone before method is a space where I sort of engage in analytic tactics. That's one way of putting it. The freedom to position myself vis-à-vis the object of study in whatever way I want. So it's arbitrary, it's anarchic. Eventually, as a social scientist, you are brought back into that disciplining zone. Now, here are three that I'm sort of playing with here. The first one is the need to actively destabilize what have become stable meanings. Think about today's period. When we say the economy, the middle classes, the national state, the international system, they're all changed, they're all unstable meanings. Now, when it comes to the city, there are vast numbers of massive pronouncements about cities. And so I think I want to destabilize that meaning of city. That is why I already said the city is a complex but incomplete system. But there is more. And that is that a lot of density, which we assume is a city condition, may not at all be really city-like. It may just be densely built up terrain. An endless row of office buildings, an endless row of high-rise residential buildings. Is that a city? Or is that densely built up terrain? Now, I like to separate those two. I like to say that what we have in the world today is a lot of stuff that is densely built up terrain. It's not necessarily city. Now, I say that partly because I already said that the city is a complex but incomplete system. Densely built up terrain is actually pretty elementary if it is always the same thing, office after office, residential building after residential building. And so that means that when we speak about urbanization and the future of the city, we may well be talking about two different formations. Both are happening. So I think, for instance, that we need to build new cities. Cities, not just built up dense terrain. I think today we're in the business of building, expanding homogeneous situations, offices, residences, basically, warehouses maybe. That is not city. And that is why at the beginning I said that I think it matters to capture what is the particularity of the city. If the city is that space where we get to make a history, even if we do not have power, it matters. What is happening in Hong Kong right now, what has happened in a few other places, it could not happen in an office district. It could, for good or for bad, we can have totally different opinions. It could not happen in simply one high-rise building after another of housing. So there are certain kinds of complexities that the city is a great space to enact. Silicon Valley is another good example. It is a kind of, it's not as complex as a city, but it had many different worlds coming together. And it produced enormous creativity. Very little extreme innovation has come out of office parks. Office parks are in a more routinized, so what was it called, Road 125 up by MIT did not turn out to be a Silicon Valley. So in that sense, two very different. It's much easier to build dense office districts or office parks than to build a city. So I do think we need to build new cities, but it's going to be a challenge. Now, the second one is, with all the talk about urbanization, I stand back and I ask myself, what don't I see when I say the word urbanization? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I'm a bit tired when I hear politicians who have never been really interested in a city maybe say, well, most people now live in the cities. Well, but desertification, massive land grabs that are expelling people out of, where do they go? They go to cities. There is a whole non-urban world, and it is an expanding world in its own terms that has far fewer people, and those people wind up in cities. And then, of course, there is a whole set of other things, but that is basically, I want to run through some of these issues. You know that in the shadows of these powerful explanations, there is all kinds of stuff happening. Now, the third point here is territory. I want to propose, maybe more for the point of having a discussion, having an invitation to think aloud, that on the one hand, territory is a complex category with embedded logics of power, which in our Western modernity became the national state, the most achieved of these. And on the other hand, embedded logics of claim-making, which again, in our Western modernity, became citizenship. There are other versions of all of this. Territory, in other words, is not land, it's not terrain, it's not space, it's this complex mixture The city is a territory. An office park is more like a space. And so one issue then is today, when we still think, I would say around the world, west and east, north and south, that territory is what belongs to the nation state. And to some extent, for good parts of our history, it has been that. It has been something that is the one meaning that it has. I want to free that category up analytically to make it work. Because right now, no matter how complex, if it has only one meaning, it is not working analytically. It's just sitting there pretty in all its complexity. And I want to argue that the city, in a way, is today increasingly becoming a kind of territory. And if you think of let me rephrase that. I sort of would like to invite you to think about urban geopolitics. With privatization, with deregulation, in a context of globalization, what actually happens is that more and more of what used to be in the international relations, in the interstate system, is now intercity, across boundaries. And, a lot of the stuff that is shaping what we call international relations, the global economy, global terrorism, whatever, is actually an intercity phenomenon to a very large extent. Maybe the terrorism bit less clearly. So for me, there is a kind of emergent urban geopolitics that is a set of territories where cities are really the core anchors. And again, I want to repeat, when you privatize and deregulate an economy, what used to happen in the national state, like the legislatures overseeing public sector firms, now shifts to the city. And that is the history of these last 30 years. That is where the global city comes out. So the city becomes the space where you produce, as private specialized services, what used to be legislatures' work, when it was regulatory framings, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking about the city, the future of the city, as a complex territory also means thinking that part of our future is a kind of urban geopolitics. Now, so I like this image here, urban landscape, that the city is a particular kind of territory. And one feature that it has is that it makes visible stuff that when you think about national territory, it's just not visible because of where it's held, because of the dimensions, etc. So that adds something important. That means that the city also is a space where you actually learn. You learn about the current history. You learn about globalization. If you live in a city like New York, in a city like Singapore, there is no way that you cannot experience the global, its attractivenesses and its injustices, right? So a strong learning space. Now, I'm just going to skip over all of this. I love all this stuff on territory, etc. I've written a big book on that. Anybody who wants to ask questions about territory, please, I love those questions. Now, one way of standing back and looking at the city is to think of it as a territorial surface, a territorial formation that we are making. The amazing thing about the city also is that we are the makers. And when I say territorial surface, it's because of its visibility. It's all out there. Very interesting. There are many places that don't have those properties. And now, among the other, just to give you a broader landscape, a landscape that actually matters, I think, to understand where we're going with the city are some of these others. So dead land, dead water. As you well know, we have a lot of dead land. We make it invisible. I'm always saying we should have on our maps in kindergarten the shapes of the land we have killed, the shapes of the water bodies we have killed, because that's part of the story. That is also part of the story of the future of the city. Obsolescent visual orders, stuff that doesn't belong anymore. Invasions into familiar visual order, when stuff begins to happen that unsettles a familiar visual order. Cities are very good at this. Cities, moreover, teach us, you know what, it's okay, it's okay. Whereas in other settings, that is truly can be traumatic. Now then the city as one such formation under often acute transformation, right? Now here, this is one territorial formation that implicates the city. I don't know how many of you, this is in the public domain. This is a map of 10,000 buildings in the United States, which are in the business of full-time data gathering. How much surveillance actually comes out of all that data gathering is a variable question, but they're certainly gathering data. And these are very material events. They're huge buildings. They're sort of invisible because we don't know, they don't carry meaning. And that is why I like the city also as a space that actually makes visible all kinds of issues. Now here are just some numbers, because the numbers are actually amazing. So you very quickly, you can read that. An estimated, by now the numbers are up, the last point, an estimated 1 million people, nearly 1.5 times as many people as live in Washington, D.C., hold top secret security clearance. Now, the reason I bring this up is both because of a visual question, what is made legible and what is not. The last one of these buildings that was just finished was in Utah. It's huge and it's invisible, not because it's below the ground, because the space within which it exists does not help us see what it really is about. And again, I come back to this notion of the city as a space that makes visible, as a heuristic zone. Now, this is also an amazing datum. So in Washington and the surrounding area, this is just an example of these non-urban invasions, if you want, into an urban setting. In Washington and the surrounding, 33 building complexes for top secret intelligence work are under construction or have been built since September 2001. This is the point I wanted to make. Together, they occupy about 17 million square feet, the equivalent of almost 3 pentagons, or 22 US Capitol buildings. In the United States, the Capitol building is the house of democracy, our house. Well, those buildings, 22 times, so you get the picture. Now, these are densities. They are not urban, even if they are in cities. They are built up terrain. When we try to understand what is the future of cities, we the people, we the citizens, we the artists, we the architects, we whoever, we've got to have a clear idea of what is a city. A city has enabled us to extraordinary ways across time. We can't mix it up with densely built settings. And as I said at the beginning, we need to build new cities. We can't have these stories that is dribbling, as in Sao Paulo or many in Lagos, etc. The inner slums in big cities, they're working slums, they function fine. But the edges are spaces of death, of poverty, of extreme miseries. That is not life. So we have to build cities. The cities that we're building are not being so successful. We've got to understand something about cityness, if you want, that cannot be reduced to density. Now, now here is another construction. This is, I'm sure that some of you know this, it's in the public domain. I only mention things about the public domain. But China has been carrying vast loads of rocks and sand to build up 5 new islands in the South China Sea. And it builds it on the reefs that are there. And so these are other things that are happening, and I think these material, I would just want to expand the variable of surface material constructions. And just because it's built doesn't mean that it can be urbanized or that it is urban. Now, I just also wanted to very quickly run through something that I think is critical, which is our planetary destruction. It will be a critical part of the future of cities in a way that is way beyond what we understand now. So here are some very familiar graphs. I just want to run them. I don't know how familiar. They all come from my new book. And this is the temperature of land. A lot of land that is getting hotter and hotter. A lot of land that on the surface, like the Midwest of the United States, the breadbasket of the world, I don't know what all the beautiful phrases are that we have for it. It looks beautiful green. Green, if green is the color of fertility, let's say, right? Green, all those fertilizers, they do their job. But the temperature has been going up like that. That land is dying. It just doesn't look. When it dies, where are those people going to go to? They go to cities. This is just one example. We have many such examples of desertification. Now, I looked at all kinds of measures, all kinds of debates, the scientists disagreeing, you name it. But it all goes up. It's all in that direction, right? This is, again, confirmed warming trend. These are all the areas where right now water is limiting agricultural production. And you can see that the US is part of it. Where are those people going to go? To cities. This is an extraordinary act of making. The Aral Sea, the darkness is water. In a period, you realize, of 20 years, we managed to reduce it to a minimum. One has to stand back and to say, that is an accomplishment. This is a huge lake. These are billions and billions of cubic meters of water. How did we manage in 20 years? So, extraordinary capacities. Now, I'm clearly not using capacity in an always positive sense. This is the other part of the story, right? You all know. Now, this is not necessarily going to affect people moving to cities as the other things that I've talked about. But what this means is the melting of the permafrost, which means a methane that is many times stronger than the current methane. And it means all kinds of other things, all the microbes that we have discovered, including the microbes in our body. I think the future belongs to microbes. So there is a biologist who has this amazing image. He talks about, dark biological matter. That's us. We know very little about the microbes inside our body, and they are critical actors. So again, this also the methane gases we're discovering. Some of you know this, of course. So these are all, when I think about the future, I'm thinking of these kinds of trends and how they will affect cities. Now here is more. I don't want to talk. These are the water, the high rises, etc. Now, here is one thing that is happening now, and it is now already producing massive migrations. This is something that is going to expand even further. This is just one little period that I'm taking. It's a very old history. I argue that the imperial geographies are different from today's geographies. Now, between 2010 and between 2006 and 2010, 220 million hectares of land were bought by about 15 governments and about 100 firms. And this only counts, this is a global network, global land matrix. We only count parcels that are over 220 hectares. So here is what you get very quickly. We don't need to elaborate. Europe looks very little because Europe doesn't have big land patches. Now, I'll keep it on here. The main issue here is what happens, and these are real. I have a long research project on this. So this is just one example. What happens when a government buys 2.8 million hectares of land in Zambia to construct, I literally like the language construct, a plantation for palm fuel? First, eviction of flora floras and faunas, so already debilitating the ecosystem. Second, eviction of rural economies, rural manufacturing districts, genealogies of meaning, cultures, forms of knowledge, etc. Land, elementary condition from territory with all these embedded meanings to land. A land, moreover, that will die sooner. Where do those people go? They go to cities. So this is just one little example. There are many others. But a lot of the non-urban is playing a critical role in cities. Another thing is, of course, the specializing in the global economy. If you are a mine, if you are an agricultural firm, if you do something that has nothing to do with the urban, you have an urban moment in the form of the highly specialized services that you need, the financing, the accounting, the lawyering, all the specialized forms, very high level. So more and more of the non-urban has a critical moment in its trajectory, so to say, in the city. That then also leads me to say that the kind of this urban geopolitics that is beginning to emerge now is only going to grow. And that means that cities, often in far more informal ways than national governments, will be shaping part of what we still call the interstate system. Now, I happen to think that that's good, because the city has a different project. It's more immediate, it's more urgent. Now, similarly, with all kinds of issues about the poor, etc. It's all visible in the city. You see the displacement of people. You see the homeless. Now, moving into the city and just mentioning two very different processes that, again, I think are beginnings of histories that are going to affect the future of cities. So I don't want to dwell too much on this, but the point here is the development of an instrument that led to massive foreclosures and expulsions, leaving a lot of empty, built-up land in cities. Here are some of the figures. Oh, this doesn't show. So this is 2006. These are foreclosures. Foreclosures don't necessarily mean that you are evicted out of your home. This is data for the United States. It's also happening in Europe. The Europeans mostly are not aware of it. And so you see that according to Bernanke, before he left, that's the head of the American Central Bank, he said that the total of people out of their homes stood at close to 13 million. Now, 13 million households, it's also rental property, there's a lot of other stuff, but we're talking about 30 million individuals, invisible. And what we're left with the city are empty spaces. Now, here's the other, well, this is Europe. So in Europe, look at the highest foreclosure rates, and many of these are also being expelled. Germany, this is every year. This is not cumulative. The numbers are much smaller than in the US. So this is an instrument that has now been declared illegal in the United States. It's entered Europe. Hungary is right now the worst case. They have 1 million. Hungary is a small country. So again, this is making holes, trous, agujeros, in the tissue of urban fabric. Now, here is one way in which it can get filled up, which is the super prime housing market. I don't know how many of you have heard of this market. This is a future in cities. And I don't think it's such a great element here. So this is an invented market where there is minimum price. So in Monaco, it's 18.9 million, etc. You see, those are the main nationalities. This is a lot of outside, foreigners. I have nothing against that. I'm a foreigner in just about all the countries where I have lived in. But these are the main buyers. The main buyers are, to some extent, and they vary. So here are a few more. I have a full list. About 20 cities are involved right now. I always find very interesting, in Shanghai, you can see the world wants to buy, not Dubai, And in Hong Kong, most of the buyers are mainland Chinese, anyhow. Now, what are we speaking about when we talk about these kinds of, super prime markets? We're talking about de-urbanizing. Huge mansions built, where before you had all kinds of little places, little houses. Public street tissue disappears, little squares disappear. So this is deep in the interiority of the city. You have these de-urbanizing processes. And I don't think that that's great. We need wealthy elites in cities because they often promote the arts, they promote the culture, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not against sort of traditional benefactors and all of that. This is much more problematic, and I have imagery that I can show here of the inside of some of these properties. London is, of course, the most acute case. They haven't lived there for a very long time. You have trees growing inside of these private mansions. So what are they doing? I mean, some of them are used. These are the extreme cases, and quite stunning, very visual sort of representations of the fact that they are not living there. So you stand back and you ask, well, what am I seeing here? And what I'm seeing is the buying of urban land. Yes, how do you buy urban land? Well, you buy urban land through buildings. And if you buy one little building, that's one thing. And so mega projects, in a way, also de-urbanize. You eliminate little squares, little urban tissue, et cetera, and then you have a simplifying of urban space. Now, I'm trying to find my clock here. I think I have to stop talking very soon. I wanted to, this is something that I also have done a lot of work on, is the question of smart cities. And my basic take is we've got to urbanize the smart technology. Right now, most smart cities are pretty dumb, actually. They're dumb because they're rigid, because they're centralized command structures. And if it is urban, you become more intelligent by open sourcing it, by understanding what do all these people, not projecting, not assuming, these are the top 5 things that they will do. No, by actually registering. So I have a project on open sourcing the neighborhood. The neighborhood being the space which typically has a lot of very particular knowledge, but it's not knowledge that goes into the codified knowledge of the center, that being the knowledge of government experts, period, government bureaucracies, that kind of stuff. So here, this is a wonderful artist. These are all real buildings that are still standing, but he imagined them dying. This is acute advanced stage. I don't know how well you can see it. Now, so here is a bit for me about the importance of urbanizing technology. We're going to really need massive deployments of technology in our cities, but we've got to urbanize these technologies. I'm going to move on. And I would say also that the city actually has speech. The city talks to us. It tells us what doesn't work. And my favorite example, I have it listed there, very simple. Is a car an extraordinary event, good car, made for speed, any terrain, arrives at the crowded downtown, and all these capacities, poof, they are neutralized. I say the city has spoken. So if we begin, I have a whole article on this, does the city have speech? I mean speech as in the legal category. And if we would allow ourselves to actually pick up on being in a city means that, yes, it's you, yes, it's the built environment, and then there is another systematicity, which is actually the speech of the city. What works and what doesn't work. A mixture of buildings, technologies, spaces, people, a complex kind of speech, very elusive. So I think that that's one thing, open sourcing the neighborhood, trying to understand how the city talks, etc. I'm going to end, though I just wanted to put on the table I was going to also talk about, coming back to the environment, is the city has got to be in the vanguard, a complex vanguard of the environmental question. And I think we need to exit, or not exit, but go well beyond the space of conventional policy making. We need to make every surface of the city work. And then you have these marvelous discoveries that biologists are making, that certain bacteria, certain algae have all kinds of properties that would mean that you are working with the biosphere rather than against it. One of my favorite ones, recently sort of put together, discovered, etc., is a bacterium that if you put it in brown organic waters, it actually produces a molecule of plastic. A plastic that is durable, resistant, but biodegradable. All cities, big, small, produce brown waters. All cities have a real problem. It's a cost, it's an issue of disposal, we don't know what to do with it. This would mean that it goes from a negative into a positive. All cities become the source or the makers of a biodegradable plastic. And similar examples like this bacterium that if you put it on concrete, seals off greenhouse gas emissions and eventually actually purifies the air around the surface. All concrete surfaces in cities should be working. So I have this sort of great project with scientists. How do we transform existing negatives in such a way that we bring the biosphere in and delegate to her, not return to nature, I don't believe in that, but we delegate to her what she knows best. And now I have to shut up. Thank you very much.